Good morning, everybody. Let me just get my screen shared real quick and we'll get started. So my name is Laura Hamilton. I am the HR Area Administrator for Washington State University Spokane campus. And we have been working on different little single point lessons on how to make process changes and engage effectively as a team. One of the things that we're going to talk about today is actually making, using, and committing to team ground rules. This can be really helpful and important for a team if you have major processes or projects that you're going to be working on, so that if you get out of alignment as far as how people are interacting with each other, you have something to point back to have the conversations about what those expectations would be, regardless of your membership on the team, that anyone on the team would have the ability to insert into the conversation and say, hey, I think we're getting a little off track here. So let's talk about the process of how we would do that. So the first thing that can be important is making sure that we're getting the expectations from all of the members of the team. So really sitting through a little brainstorming session with the team to think about what are the behaviors that people like and what are the behaviors that people really dislike. That helps you in having the conversation as you look at the things that people like about a team. Are there areas of deficit with the current behaviors with the team that can be addressed in the ground rules? And when you think about the behaviors that you don't like, you're going to look at those, and some of them are going to be things that are already going to be norms for the team that we don't engage in this way. So it doesn't really need to become a ground rule, but there would be other areas that might be those trigger points for individuals that need to be focused on. So the ground rules, as a team works on putting those together, really can help to create a team environment where the behaviors and the process sustain the needed results. So if people aren't engaging with each other in a really effective way, it becomes very difficult to move projects and processes forward in a timely and efficient manner, and without added road bumps and barriers that are unnecessary. Are there norms for the group that already exist and others that maybe need to be added to? Are there norms that are less than ideal for the group that really need to be addressed through the ground rules? Again, so that everybody has a voice in being able to step forward and saying, hey, we agreed not to do this anymore. So creating those ground rules can help to make the explicit norm or the expected norms more explicit. Sometimes we forget to, we just have this expectation that that's how reasonable people would behave, and so that everyone's going to behave that way. But if we're not addressing the ineffective behaviors, our new norms can become really difficult for some of our employees. Ground rules can help to establish how we work with each other individually, how we act towards each other, but then also how we come together and act as a team. So when you look at the behaviors you like, the behaviors you don't like, are there sample ground rules that you can pull from other teams and rewrite them to apply to your team? And here in a minute, I'll show you some samples that I actually worked with a team here at the institution. Be specific in the ground rules. If there is a certain behavior that's occurring, call that behavior out specifically. They really should be a commitment to each other. The team should come out together to do this exercise, because it would be a commitment to each other on how everybody's going to work together to honestly address the issues that the team needs to work on. It really, ground rules should not be things that the team has already mastered. As I've worked with some teams, they're like, but we want to have a win as a part of this process. But that's not super effective. That can just be put to the side of, this is a norm and something we've already mastered. The ground rules really should be areas of focus and intentionality around areas that you're having concerns and that you need some improvement. I had a team once that I worked with that had 20 ground rules that they came up with. It is very difficult for anyone, I think, to remember all 20 of those and to hold each other accountable to all 20 of those. So really try to limit it to maybe 6 or 7 at a time and focus on those areas that are most important, that are causing the highest amount of difficulty for the team. So as I said, here's some examples of some ground rules that I worked with for a team here. We will share observations and be curious when engaging with our colleagues. And I really liked that curiosity piece. It is important that as we're sharing things that are happening, that we're sharing them as observations and not asserting some sort of intentionality to what individuals on our team are doing. But I really appreciate that curiosity piece when teams are working with each other. We will listen generously and speak openly and transparently. We will maintain communications up, down, and across. When we aren't sure, we will ask. That communications piece for a lot of teams can be really critical and important. A lot of times we remember to communicate up, we remember to communicate down, but we forget to communicate across. And sometimes the best practices and processes as a team are going to have impact in that across spectrum. So we need to make sure we're communicating with all of those people. We will respect time commitments by being punctual and honoring deadlines. That's a difficulty that a lot of teams face. We have a lot of competing priorities. And so there will be times that people step into meetings late without letting folks know ahead of time. And so honoring those commitments and those deadlines can be critical for a lot of teams. Again, these are just examples and samples of some ground rules. You'll want to take really what are the problem areas and work as a team to come up with ground rules that really impact the issue areas for your team. If you need examples or samples of different ground rules that a lot of different teams that I've worked on have come together with, we're happy to help and support with that. I have a myriad of examples of different ground rules. We will ensure that all members of the team have airtime when decisions are being made, and we will help each other learn. It is important to revisit on a somewhat regular basis and modify the ground rules. You're going to have areas that as team members are holding each other accountable to these new rules, that you master an area. And so that gives you the ability, if there are other behaviors that you really like or that you really dislike that are problematic for the team, that you're able to address those new areas through that modification. But setting at the very beginning an expectation that, hey, we're going to revisit this in 6 months, or we're going to revisit this once a quarter. So we're going to revisit every 3 months and make modifications and say, okay, what areas are we doing really well? What areas are we really struggling with that we need to pay a little bit more attention to? So what happens when someone breaks a ground rule? Every member of the team at one point or another are going to break a ground rule. We are human. There are reasons that the ground rules were put together, because it is an area of struggle that the team is having, that different members of the team are having. So agreeing to an open dialogue about how ground rule violations will be addressed. How are we going to hold each other accountable for ground rules through coaching and through dialogue? Hopefully there's the ability to have very direct conversations between the individual who violated the ground rule and the person who noticed or was a part of the conversation when the ground rule was being violated. A lot of teams, I've made a recommendation, come up with an ouch word. Sometimes by just coming up with some sort of kind communication around the violation, it deflates the emotion around the subject and really gets the individual back to that space of, oh, this is something I agreed to, and I can recognize that I just violated it. And so especially when there are power differentials that are in place, having that ouch word that we can point to can help with the impact of that conversation, which can be difficult. It's intimidating sometimes, to, especially when there is a power dynamic, to say, hey, I think we agreed not to do this. But how to handle the violation, be direct and be very specific. If you have agreed to an ouch word or something of that nature to in a non-threatening way, bring up that there's a violation, you still need to be specific about what the violation was, but it can calm the emotion. Engaging in a non-threatening manner, I mean, obviously we get frustrated when we've agreed to something and someone's violated that agreement, but it can be more effective engaging in a conversation in a very non-threatening way, in a way that we really are trying to help each other learn and to be accountable to the agreements that we've made as a team. It can be much more effectively accomplished by sharing an observation instead of a conclusion. So I want to share with you some conclusions versus observations as I've been through this process with different teams that have come up. And so I picked 3 of them that are fairly common with different teams. So one that I've actually heard used is, you don't respect our team because you show up late for our meetings every week. Instead, there's just a plain observation of, I noticed you showed up for the meeting late today. That gives an openness to continuing a conversation where the individual can help share some information. Sometimes people are having a bad day and really awful things have happened, and it gives them the opportunity to share some of what happened and to make apologies for the violation of the ground rule. You don't think my project is important, which is why you haven't provided me the data that I need. Instead, we can share an observation of saying, I haven't received the data that you committed to me last week. Can you help me understand why? Can you help me understand what a new reasonable deadline would be? That's an open conversation. A lot of times these conclusion conversations shut down any sort of dialogue. You didn't tell me about the new process, so I put it through the way I've always done it. Instead, you can just say, I wasn't aware of the new process. That opens the conversation to the individual being able to share with you what the new processes are, what new information is available that you need to be aware of. Our observations can always be followed up with a question if it doesn't organically lead to a dialogue. So even as I shared one of the observations, just the way my brain works, I went automatically into some questions. I haven't received the data you committed to me last week. Can you help me understand if there are concerns? Is there a new timeline that we can set for that? Sometimes if we have a specific intention with a conversation, you have those specific questions that you're going to want to have answered, so it's fine to add those to the observation. But when we're making conclusions, we're making it as a statement, and it shuts down the conversation from being able to move forward. So again, to wrap this all up, reviewing the team ground rules regularly to ensure that there's still the areas that the team needs to focus on. Hopefully, over time, we're going to get better at certain areas, and we're not going to need to have the same ground rules as we move forward. And they're going to be modified as we become more effective in communicating with each other and honoring the areas of difficulty that other team members may have. If there are a number of violations of the same ground rule, and you're able to identify that those are being made by the same team member, or you're able to identify that, hey, maybe we need to redefine and focus on increased attention to specific ground rules because everyone seems to be having difficulty. So I don't recommend on ground rules that we keep a ground rule because one individual is having difficulty adhering to it. I think those are times that we need to then escalate the conversation, and instead of having that one-on-one conversation about the violation, that we're then addressing it with that individual supervisor and saying, hey, this is something that we agreed to as a team. I've given it multiple shots to try to have the realignment of the conversation, but there still seems to be a lot of difficulty around it. Is there a different way that we can approach this? If it is something everybody's having some difficulty with, sometimes we weren't specific enough in the ground rule, and we need to add some redefinition or some focus to the ground rule. So those are, again, reasons it's really important that we are going back and spending the time to redefine ground rules on a fairly frequent basis. And then it gives you the opportunity again to address what new ground rules, like we've become an expert in 2 of the 6. So are there 2 new areas that we can help to address of things that may have arisen as we've progressed as a team that we didn't know were ouch moments before, but they're becoming ouch moments for the team. And is it a good time to go back and review a sample list? Are there other areas that we maybe have blinders to that, hey, if we looked at some of these ground rules, it may, they're not necessarily current ouch moments, but it could help us to be more effective in our communications with other teams in the work that we do. So hopefully this was helpful for you. Again, if it is helpful for anyone who is on this training to have some sample ground rules, some sample lists, happy to share those. And hopefully by engaging in these ground rules, it will help the team to be able to communicate more effectively. And then next Wednesday, I will be talking about how to create meaningful meetings. And so the opposite of the sometimes less than ideal, less than efficient meetings that we can have as teams, and how can we as members of those meetings help to realign the conversation. So hope you guys have a fantastic week, and please don't forget to log into Smart Help and log your participation so you can get those points. Have a great day.